She said she wanted to live for herself. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I just opened a drawer, made a few quiet phone calls, and by the time she realized what I'd done, her plan, her escape, and everything she thought was hers had already disappeared. If I'm being straight with you, I could have seen it coming. Looking back now, the signs were there the way rust spreads under paint. Hidden, patient, doing its work long before you see the damage. Subtle at first, easy to explain away, until one day the whole floor shifts under your feet. I told myself she was stressed. I told myself it was a rough patch. I told myself a lot of things that turned out to be nothing more than comfortable lies I chose to believe. My name is Henry Malone. I'm 46 years old. I own a workplace safety and compliance agency in Charlotte, North Carolina. We consult for manufacturing plants, construction firms, warehouses, the kind of businesses where one overlooked regulation can put a man in a hospital. I built that company from scratch over 14 years. Started with one client and a second-hand laptop in the spare bedroom. Now I have 11 employees, a solid reputation, and contracts with 4 of the largest industrial firms in the state. My wife, Ella, is 42. She's a logistics manager for a regional distribution company. Sharp, organized, good under pressure. Or at least that's who she used to be when I was the one benefiting from those qualities. We have a son, Asher. He's 14, quiet in the way that smart kids get quiet when they're processing more than they let on. He plays chess at school, fixes old electronics for fun, and asks questions that sometimes stop me cold because they're too precise for a teenager. I love that kid more than I know how to say out loud. We've been married 17 years. We met when I was 29 and she was 25 at a conference in Raleigh of all places. She was funny, direct, and the kind of woman who made you feel like keeping up with her was a privilege. I proposed on a Tuesday because she always said she hated grand gestures. She laughed and said yes before I finished the sentence. That woman feels like someone I read about a long time ago. It started, or rather, I started noticing, on an ordinary Wednesday in October. I was cleaning out the kitchen junk drawer. You know the one. Every house has it. Dead batteries, dried up pens, takeout menus from restaurants that closed 3 years ago, spare keys that open things you can no longer remember. I was halfway through the chaos when my hand hit a folded slip of paper wedged under a rubber band. I almost threw it out without looking. It was a receipt, printed from one of those upscale farm-to-table places downtown, the kind with exposed brick and a $40 entree. The date on it was a Friday, 3 weeks earlier. I stood there doing the math in my head. That Friday, Ella had told me she was having dinner with colleagues from the distribution center. Running late, don't wait up. The receipt showed 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, 1 dessert. Nothing criminal in that, except for one detail. The restaurant was Harlow's. Our restaurant. The place we went every year on our anniversary because it was where I'd proposed. I hadn't set foot in there since our last anniversary dinner, 10 months ago. I set the receipt on the counter and looked at it for a long time. My stomach dropped, then tightened. That particular feeling when your gut figures something out and your brain scrambles to catch up and dismiss it at the same time. I didn't say anything to Ella that night, or the next. Instead, I started paying attention in a different way. Not paranoid, not obsessive, just aware. And the more I looked, the more I saw things I'd been too trusting to register. The way she started keeping her phone screened down on the counter. The way she'd step out of the room to take calls she used to take at the kitchen table. The way she stopped wearing perfume unless she was heading out to something I wasn't invited to. I noticed that she'd been coming home on Friday evenings carrying a particular kind of quiet. Not tired quiet, but the overly composed quiet of someone maintaining a performance. I noticed she started locking the bathroom door. She never used to lock doors. I told myself maybe I was reading into things. Maybe I was tired. Maybe this was just what 17 years looked like from the inside. But then there was that receipt, sitting in the junk drawer, waiting like it knew exactly what it was. I folded it back up and put it in my desk drawer instead. I didn't throw it away. Some part of me already knew I was going to need it. The weeks after I found that receipt were quiet in a way that felt wrong. Not peaceful. Loaded. Like the air before a storm when the birds stop making noise and everything goes still and you know something's coming but you can't see it yet. I watched Ella the way you watch a gauge on a piece of equipment you don't fully trust anymore. Not obsessively, just steadily. And the more I watched, the more I cataloged. Little things. The kind of things that individually mean nothing, but together start to form a shape. She started going to bed later. Said she was catching up on work emails. But I'd walk past the bedroom door and hear her typing fast, then stopping, then typing again. The rhythm of a conversation, not a report. She began carrying her phone into the bathroom with her, which she'd never done in 17 years of marriage. She stopped asking about my week. Not dramatically, not in a way you could call out without sounding petty. Just quietly, the way a tide pulls back before a wave. I kept the receipt in my desk drawer, looked at it twice more, kept my mouth shut. Then came the Sunday that changed everything. Asher was at his friend Derek's place for the afternoon. Ella and I were in the kitchen. I was making coffee. She was standing by the window, scrolling her phone with that particular kind of focus that has nothing to do with the room you're in. I didn't try to start conversation. I wasn't in the mood to perform normal. She set her phone face down on the counter, crossed her arms, and then, without any preamble, without a single warning, she said it. Henry, I think I need to live for myself for a while. Without you. She said it the way you'd read a grocery list item out loud. Flat. Practiced. I set my coffee mug down on the counter. Slowly. The way you set something down when you're making sure your hands are steady. Say that again, I said. She met my eyes for the first time in what felt like weeks. I'm not happy. I haven't been for a while. I need space to figure out who I am outside of this marriage. I stood there for a moment. I thought about the receipt. I thought about the late night typing. I thought about 14 years of building something. This house, this family, this life, brick by patient brick. Then I said, all right, Ella, you want to live for yourself? Go ahead. I'll give you exactly what you're asking for. She blinked. That wasn't the response she'd rehearsed for. I could see it, the slight pause, the recalibration. That's not what I heard exactly what you said. I told her. And I mean exactly what I said. You want freedom? I won't stand in the way. But understand something. That freedom doesn't come with this address attached to it. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried a different angle. You're overreacting. I just need some breathing room. I'm not asking for a divorce. You're not asking for much of anything, I said. You're telling. And I'm responding. She stared at me for a long moment, and I watched something shift in her expression. Not guilt, not regret. Calculation. She hadn't expected me to stay calm. She'd expected tears, or anger, or begging. Something she could manage. I picked up my coffee and walked to the back porch. I needed to think. That night, after Ella had gone to bed, phone on her nightstand, screen down as always, I went to my office and sat down. I opened a notepad and started writing. Not a letter, not a confrontation, just a list. Everything I'd noticed over the past 6 weeks, written out plainly, in order. I was halfway through the list when I heard a soft knock on my office door. It was Asher, still in his hoodie, eyes half tired but sharp. Dad, he said quietly, can I tell you something? I closed the notepad. Of course. Come in. He sat across from me and looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked up. About 2 months ago, he said, I was waiting for Mom to pick me up from chess club. She was late. When she finally pulled up, there was a guy getting out of the passenger side. He grabbed his bag off the back seat. She said he was a co-worker who needed a ride. I kept my expression level. Go on. He kissed her on the cheek before he walked away. Asher said. I didn't say anything because I thought maybe I was wrong about what I saw, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. I looked at my son, this careful, precise kid who'd been carrying that for 2 months, and felt something shift hard inside my chest. You did the right thing telling me, I said. Are you and Mom going to be okay? I didn't lie to him, but I didn't tell him the full truth either, because he was 14 and he didn't need to carry what I was about to carry. I'm going to handle it, I said. That's my job, not yours. He nodded and went back to bed. I sat there in the dark for a long time after that. The list on the notepad suddenly felt a lot shorter than what I actually knew. I've always believed that the truth doesn't hide, it waits. It sits in plain sight and lets you walk past it until you're finally ready to look directly at it. That Monday morning, I was ready. Ella left for work at her usual time. Asher caught the school bus at 7:15. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the bus pull away, then went upstairs to the bedroom. On the nightstand, next to the charging cable she always used for her phone, sat her old tablet. She'd stopped using it regularly about a year ago, switched to doing everything on her phone. But I remember that she'd linked them together years back to sync her calendar and messages. I picked it up. It wasn't password protected. She'd forgotten, or assumed it no longer mattered. It took me about 4 minutes to understand that my marriage was over. The messages were right there, synced from her phone, sitting in a thread with a contact saved simply as T. 8 months of it. I didn't read every word. I read enough. Enough to know his name was Tanner. Enough to know they'd been meeting on Tuesday evenings, which Ella spent at what she called her wellness group. Enough to know they'd checked into the Ardmore Suites on 4 separate occasions. All booked under my last name, Malone, on a credit card I hadn't looked at closely enough. I set the tablet down on the bed and breathed through my nose for a moment. Then I picked it up again and kept reading because I needed the full picture before I made a single move. There was a message from 6 weeks ago that stopped me cold. Ella had written, "He's so checked out lately. I almost feel bad, but it makes things easier. Let's wait until after New Year's. He always does something for the holidays, and I don't want questions from Asher yet." She was using my predictability as a cover. She'd mapped my habits and built her deception around them, like a contractor framing a wall around a load-bearing beam. I also found something I hadn't expected. A saved apartment search, 6 listings in the Noda neighborhood, screenshots of floor plans, a text to her friend Maggie that read, "If he doesn't play ball with the terms, I already know where I'm going. Place on Clement Avenue has a 6-month lease option." Maggie had replied, "Smart. Keep your options open, babe." So she'd been planning an exit, but a strategic one. Not just walking out the door, walking out with whatever she could carry. I put the tablet back exactly where I'd found it, cable plugged in, screen down. Then I went to my office and made 1 phone call. Frank Lancaster picked up on the second ring. Frank and I had known each other since our late 20s. He'd been at our wedding, godfather to Asher, for about 5 minutes before Ella decided she wanted her cousin in the role instead. He was a family law attorney and, more importantly, a man who did not waste words. "I need to come in," I said. "Today, if possible." 2 o'clock, he said. "Bring whatever you have." I printed the bank statements going back 9 months, photographed the key messages on the tablet before I left, and drove to Frank's office in uptown Charlotte with a folder under my arm and a very specific kind of clarity in my chest. Not rage, not grief, clarity. Frank read through everything without interrupting. He was quiet for a long time after he finished. Then he said, "She tried to pull a cash-out refinance on the house." I looked up. "What?" He turned his laptop around. There was a preliminary refinancing inquiry on our property, submitted 6 weeks ago. Estimated equity withdrawal, $62,000. The application had stalled because it required both signatures, but the intent was there in black and white. She was going to pull equity out of your house before filing. Frank said, "The house is entirely in your name. You bought it before the marriage, and it's never been retitled. Legally, she has no claim to the structure, but she was betting you didn't know that." I sat very still. She didn't think I'd check. "Most people don't," Frank said. "That's what she was counting on." He leaned back and laced his fingers together. "Here's what we're going to do. We start moving your business assets into a separate LLC structure this week. Clean, legal, nothing she can challenge later. We document everything you show me, and we do all of it quietly, before she knows you've spoken to me." I nodded. She thinks I'm still standing in the kitchen, wondering what she meant. Frank almost smiled. Good. Let her think it a little longer. I drove home that afternoon feeling like a man who had just discovered the full dimensions of the hole beneath his feet, and had also, in the same afternoon, started building the bridge. The next 10 days were the most disciplined of my life. I went to work. I came home. I cooked dinner on the nights it was my turn. I asked Asher about his chess matches and actually listened to the answers. I was present in every room of that house in a way I hadn't been in months. Not because things were good, but because I needed Ella to believe nothing had changed. She seemed relieved by my calm. I could see it in the way her shoulders dropped when she walked in and found me reading on the couch rather than waiting with questions. She mistook my stillness for surrender. That was her first mistake. Frank moved fast on the LLC restructuring. My safety and compliance agency, Malone Workplace Solutions, had 11 employees and 4 active industrial contracts worth a combined annual value of just over $900,000. Within 8 days, Frank had transferred the operating assets into a newly formed entity under a trust structure that I controlled outright. Perfectly legal, perfectly documented, and completely outside the reach of any divorce proceeding Ella might initiate. She's going to hire someone who looks for this. Frank told me on the phone one evening. Let them look, I said. Everything's clean. While Frank worked the legal side, I spent my evenings in my office going through finances with the kind of focus I usually reserve for compliance audits. What I found made my jaw tighten. In a way, I had to work to keep off my face at the breakfast table. Over 9 months, Ella had spent $23,400 from our joint account on things she'd never mentioned. Hotels, dinners, a weekend in Asheville I'd assumed was a company retreat, boutique purchases, a pair of flights to Nashville I hadn't known about, $23,000. On another man, paid for with money I earned. I printed everything and added it to the folder on my desk. Then I found a college fund. Asher had an education savings account we'd started when he was 3 years old. 11 years of consistent deposits, birthdays, Christmases, monthly contributions, a bonus I'd added 2 years ago when we landed a major contract. The account had held $41,000 in September. It held $30,000 now. $11,000 had been withdrawn in 6 transactions over 5 months, each labeled with a generic transfer note. She must have assumed I didn't check that account regularly. She was right. I hadn't checked it in over a year. I sat at my desk and looked at that number for a long time. Taking from our household account was bad enough. But Asher's college fund? That was a different category entirely. That was money that belonged to a 14-year-old kid who fixed broken electronics in his bedroom and thought his parents were going to show up for him. I opened a separate savings account the next morning in my name alone and transferred the equivalent amount directly into it. $11,000, earmarked for Asher's education. Ella would never know I'd caught it. Not yet. But the money was protected. That afternoon, Frank called. One more thing, he said. I had a colleague do a quiet check on the joint credit account. I waited. She applied for a secondary card under that account 8 months ago, Frank said. It was a linked card, technically authorized under your account. She's been using it separately. Total charges over 8 months, $16,000 and change. I did the math in my head. Combined with the joint account withdrawals, she'd moved close to $40,000 through channels I hadn't been monitoring closely enough. Add it to the file, I said. Already done, Frank said. Henry, she came into this with a plan. I want you to understand the scope of what she was doing. I understand it, I said. And I did. Clearly. Completely. She had decided to leave, and she had spent months quietly stripping the accounts before she pulled the trigger. She needed me passive and uninformed right up until she was ready to walk. The problem for her was that I was neither of those things anymore. I had a plan of my own now, and unlike hers, mine was already in motion. I'd been waiting for the right moment the way you wait for a weather window on a job site, patient, reading the conditions, not moving until the timing was right. That moment came on a Saturday morning, 2.5 weeks after I'd sat in Frank's office. Asher was at a chess tournament across town. The house was ours. Ella came downstairs in her weekend clothes, poured coffee, and settled at the kitchen island with her phone. I sat across from her with my own cup and let the silence run for a minute. Then I set my mug down and said, I know about Tanner. She didn't drop her phone. She didn't gasp. Her hand simply stopped moving, hovering there above the counter, and the only sound was the refrigerator hum filling the space between us. She set the phone face down. Slowly. What did you say? Her voice was measured, but there was something underneath it, a tightening. I said, I know about Tanner. I repeated, the Ardmore Suites. The Tuesday evenings you spent at your so-called wellness group. The messages on your tablet, which you forgot was still synced. All of it, Ella. She was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then she shifted, and I watched her recalibrate in real time. You went through my things. I found your tablet on the nightstand, I said. You left it unlocked. That's an invasion of what? I asked, keeping my voice level. Of your privacy? You used our joint account to pay for his hotel rooms. You booked them under my name. Would you like to talk about invasions? Her jaw tightened. You're making this into something bigger than it is. Then tell me what size it actually is, I said. She pushed back from the counter and stood up, crossing her arms. I was unhappy, Henry. I told you I was unhappy. I told you I needed something more, and you just kept going to work and coming home and acting like everything was fine. So the solution was 8 months of lying. The solution was me trying to figure out what I needed, she said, her voice climbing. You were never present. You were always focused on the business, on contracts, on compliance reports. I was invisible in this marriage. I looked at her steadily. You weren't invisible, Ella. You were comfortable. There's a difference. Invisible women don't get new kitchens and vacations, and a husband who paid every bill for 17 years without complaint. She flinched just slightly. That's not fair. Neither was finding out my wife was using my last name to check into hotels with another man, I said. But here we are. She tried a different angle then, softer, more careful. Can we just talk about this like adults? I'm not asking for a divorce. I made a mistake. I was confused and I made a bad choice, but that doesn't have to define everything. I watched her. The pivot was smooth. I'd have been impressed if I hadn't already known what Frank had found. Ella, I said, 3 weeks ago you submitted a refinancing inquiry on this house. You were trying to pull $62,000 in equity out of a property that is solely in my name. That's not a mistake. That's a plan. The color left her face. You knew about that, she said, very quietly. I know about everything, I said. She stood there for a moment, and for the first time since the conversation started, she looked genuinely rattled. Not guilty, recalculating. Then her expression shifted again, and what came out next was the version of Ella I'd seen in tough negotiations. Cold, composed, drawing from a different well. I want to talk to someone, she said. A counselor. I think we should try counseling before either of us does something permanent. I think you should call Maggie, I said, and tell her that the Clement Avenue apartment on your list might need to become a real option. Her head came up fast. You read my messages to Maggie. I read enough, I said. I stood up, rinsed my coffee mug at the sink, and set it in the rack. I'm going to pick up Asher at noon. When I get back, I'd like you to have thought seriously about where you want to go from here, because I already know where I'm going. I walked out through the back door, got in my truck, and drove for 40 minutes without a destination. Not because I was falling apart, because I needed the road and the quiet and the simple forward motion of a vehicle going somewhere, even if that somewhere was just away. When I came back, Ella was on the phone in the bedroom with the door closed. I could hear her voice, low, clipped, the cadence of someone delivering information rather than having a conversation. I was almost certain she was talking to Maggie, planning the next move. That was fine. I was already 4 moves ahead. I found out the full scope of Maggie's involvement, not from Ella, but from Frank. He called me on a Wednesday afternoon while I was between client visits, and I pulled over in a parking lot to take it. I had someone do a discreet review of your household phone records, Frank said. The pattern between Ella's number and Maggie Sutton's number is consistent with coordination, not just friendship. 14 calls in the month of October alone, including 2 on Tuesday evenings during the windows we've identified. She was running interference, I said. Almost certainly. There are also 2 calls to your number from Maggie's, one in September, one in November, both on evenings that correspond to the dates Ella was with Tanner. Frank paused. She was checking to see if you were home, making sure the coast was clear. I sat in that parking lot for a moment, letting that settle. Maggie had been to our house for dinner 3 times this year. She'd hugged Ella at the holiday party I'd hosted for our neighbors in December. She'd sat at my table, eaten my food, and made sure my wife had a clean alibi. Add it to the file, I said. Already there, Frank said. One more thing. The college fund, the withdrawals from Asher's account. I cross-referenced the dates. 2 of them correspond with the hotel bookings at the Ardmore Suites. I gripped the steering wheel. I already knew about the missing $11,000. I'd already replaced it from my own pocket. But hearing it confirmed that she'd pulled from her son's future to pay for a hotel room put a hard edge on something that hadn't fully hardened until that moment. Noted, I said, and kept my voice even. That evening, I sat down with Asher after dinner while Ella was in the study. He was working on a circuit board at the kitchen table, some salvage project he'd picked up at a thrift store. I watched him work for a few minutes, the precise way he handled the components, the patience of a kid who understood that small things mattered. Hey, I said, I want you to know your college fund is fully intact. He looked up curious. Why wouldn't it be? Just making sure you know, I said. Whatever happens in this house over the next few months, your future is protected. That's mine to handle, not yours to worry about. He looked at me for a long moment with those 2 precise eyes of his. Is it bad, Dad? It's manageable, I said, and it's not your weight to carry. He nodded and went back to his circuit board. I watched him for another minute, then went to my office and closed the door. I pulled up the financial summary I'd been building. $23,400 from a joint account. $11,000 from Asher's fund. $16,000 on the secondary credit card Frank had flagged. Total, just over $50,000 moved through channels I hadn't been watching closely enough. $50,000. While she told me she felt invisible, I opened a new document and started a clear, itemized accounting. Every transaction, every date, every corresponding hotel booking or alibi night. It was the kind of document Frank could hand to a judge without a word of explanation needed. I was nearly done when my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I answered. A woman's voice, quiet and careful. "Is this Henry Malone?" "It is," I said. "My name is Amber," she said. "Tanner's wife. I think you know why I'm calling." I leaned back in my chair. I had sent Amber an anonymous message 4 days earlier. No signature, no drama, just the name of a hotel, a date, and a photo of a charge receipt I'd found on the tablet. Enough for a woman with open eyes to confirm what she needed to confirm. "I do," I said. "I'm sorry you're on the other end of this." Her voice stayed measured, but there was a thread of something underneath it. Not anger, just the tight control of someone holding themselves together carefully. He admitted it when I confronted him. He said she told him you were controlling and that you two had been separated for months. She paused. "None of that was true, was it?" "None of it," I said. She let out a slow breath. "I have 2 kids. I've been trying to figure out what I'm looking at for the past 4 days. I needed to hear it from someone who wasn't lying to me." "I'm not lying to you," I said. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Thank you for telling me. I mean that." After I hung up, I sat with the quiet for a moment. 2 families. 2 women who had decided to burn them down for a man whose last name I didn't even know until 8 weeks ago. I thought about Asher, about the circuit board on the kitchen table, about the way he'd said, "Is it bad, Dad?" and accepted my answer without pressing, because at 14 years old he already understood that some things were for his father to carry. I added Amber's name to my notes, not as evidence, just as a record, a real person on the other side of this. Then I closed the document, locked the desk, and went to watch the end of the evening news like everything was ordinary. It wasn't ordinary, but it was under control. And for now, that was what mattered. Frank called me on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing a safety audit for a warehouse client in Gastonia. I stepped outside into the cold parking lot and took the call with my collar up against the wind. "I had my accountant run a forensic review of your joint tax filings," Frank said. "The last 3 years." I waited. Ella has been filing her logistics commissions as a split disbursement, part reported, part directed to a secondary account that isn't on any of your joint returns. The unreported income over 3 years totals approximately $31,000. He paused. "There's more. 2 of the returns show your signature on the filing authorization. I had a handwriting analyst take a look at them this morning." "They're not my signatures," I said. "They are not your signatures," Frank confirmed. "Which means she filed falsified federal tax documents with forged authorization. That's not a civil matter, Henry. That crosses into federal territory." I stood in that parking lot for a long moment, watching a delivery truck back slowly into a loading dock across the street. Methodical, patient, one careful move at a time. "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "As long as we can demonstrate the signatures are forged, which we can, you have 0 liability. She carries it entirely. I've already drafted a letter to our tax attorney." Frank's voice stayed even, the tone of a man who had seen worse and knew exactly which tools to pick up. "This also gives us significant leverage in the separation proceedings. She doesn't just face a messy divorce anymore. She faces a federal inquiry if the IRS picks this up. Will they pick it up? Depends on whether certain documents find their way to the right desk," Frank said carefully. I understood what that meant. I also understood it wasn't a decision to make standing in a parking lot. "Let me think about that piece," I said. "Take the weekend," Frank said. "But I want you to know the option exists." I drove home that afternoon, running the numbers in my head. 31,000 in unreported income. Forged signatures on federal filings. The college fund. The joint account. The refinancing attempt. The secondary credit card. Ella hadn't just been careless. She'd been conducting a parallel financial life with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had genuinely studied the game before sitting down to play it. What she hadn't studied was me. That evening, Ella was in the kitchen when I got home, moving efficiently around the stove the way she did when she was performing normalcy. She asked about my day. I gave her a short answer. She told me about a property listing her team had picked up near Lake Norman. I listened. I nodded. I gave nothing away. After dinner, while Ella watched something in the living room, I went to the study and sat down at my desk. I pulled out the legal pad I'd been using and added the new information in clean, precise handwriting. Forged signatures. Federal exposure. Leverage. I underlined the last word twice. Then I picked up my phone and did something that had been sitting on my mental list for 2 weeks. I called the licensing board for the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. I didn't file a complaint. I asked a carefully worded question about the process for reporting potential misconduct by a licensed agent. The woman on the line explained the process patiently and emailed me a form. I printed it, read it twice, and set it in the folder next to the tax documents. I wasn't going to pull every trigger at once. That wasn't how this worked. You built the case, you positioned your pieces, and then you moved when the timing was right and the ground beneath you was solid. Frank had taught me that much, and 20 years of running a compliance business had reinforced it every day. The real estate commission form went back into the folder, waiting the way the receipt in the junk drawer had waited, knowing exactly what it was. 2 days after my call with Frank, I went to the bank. I'd been a customer at First Piedmont for 16 years. My business accounts were there, the mortgage, the household checking. The branch manager knew me by name because I'd referred 3 industrial clients to their commercial lending division over the years. That relationship mattered today. I sat down with the manager, a steady man named Gerald Holt, and walked him through what I needed. By the time I stood up 90 minutes later, the joint checking account had been frozen pending separation documentation. Ella's secondary card access had been revoked. The household savings had been moved to a new account in my name alone. The business operating accounts, already restructured under the LLC Frank had established, were untouchable. I drove home, sat in the truck in the driveway for about 3 minutes, then walked inside. Ella was at the kitchen counter with her laptop open, working on something. She looked up when I came in, read something in my expression, and closed the laptop slowly. I set an envelope on the counter between us. "What is that?" she asked. "Open it," I said. She did. Inside was a 4-page summary, clean, organized, the kind of document you hand to someone when you want them to understand exactly where they stand without any room for interpretation. Every account, every balance, every action I'd taken in the past 3 weeks, and why. At the bottom, Frank's letterhead and contact information. Ella read it standing up. I watched her go through it page by page, and I watched the color change in her face as she moved from page 1 to page 2 to 3. When she finished, she set it on the counter and looked at me. "You froze everything," she said. "I protected what's mine," I said. "There's a difference." She shook her head slowly. "Henry, you can't just—" "The joint account is frozen," I said. "Your secondary card is canceled. The savings have been separated. The business assets were restructured 2 weeks ago." I kept my voice measured. "You told me you wanted to live for yourself. I'm making sure you have the space to do exactly that, just not on a foundation I built and paid for." Her expression shifted through several things in quick succession. Shock, then calculation, then something that landed close to desperation. "You're doing this to punish me." "I'm doing this because you tried to pull $62,000 out of this house before I could respond," I said. "I'm doing this because you forged my signature on 3 years of tax filings. I'm doing this because you spent $50,000 of our household money over 9 months and put the last of Asher's college fund toward hotel rooms." I let that sit. "This isn't punishment, Ella. This is consequence. Those are different things." She went very still. "The college fund," she said, barely above a whisper. "I've already replaced every dollar," I said. "Asher will never know. But I know. And Frank knows. And it's all documented." She reached for the counter behind her like she needed it for balance. For the first time in this entire process, I saw something real move through her face. Not strategy, not calculation, but the particular kind of shame that arrives when someone finally understands the full accounting of what they've done. "I didn't think you'd actually do this," she said. "I know," I said. "That was your miscalculation." She picked up the envelope and held it without looking at it. "What happens now?" "Frank will be in touch with whoever you hire," I said. "In the meantime, you're welcome to stay in the house while the formal separation is processed. But I'd suggest you call Maggie and have a real conversation about your options, because the Clement Avenue apartment is going to start looking like a reasonable choice very soon." She looked up at the mention of Maggie. A flash of something. Anger, maybe, or the realization that I knew more than she'd ever imagined. Then it passed, and what was left was a kind of exhaustion. She walked out of the kitchen without another word, went upstairs, and closed the bedroom door. I stood at the counter for a moment, then picked up my phone and texted Frank a single word, done. His reply came back in under a minute. Good. Next step Monday. I poured a glass of water, drank it slowly, and went to check on Asher. He was in his room, headphones on, bent over his circuit board with a soldering iron. I knocked on the doorframe. He pulled one side of the headphones off and looked at me. Everything okay? He asked. Getting there, I said. You eat dinner? Made a sandwich, he said. Good kid, I said. He put the headphones back on. I stood in his doorway for another few seconds, watching him work, precise, patient, completely absorbed in the thing in front of him. Then I walked back downstairs and started thinking about what came next. The formal separation filing hit on a Monday morning in February. Frank hand-delivered the documents to Ella's attorney, a woman named Diane Pruitt who Frank described as capable but unprepared for what was in the package. I wasn't there for that meeting. I was at a client site in Concord running a compliance walkthrough for a new warehouse operation, doing the work that had built everything Ella had tried to take. Frank called me at noon. Her attorney read the full summary. He said, the tax documents, the forged signatures, the college fund withdrawals matched to hotel dates. Diane asked for 2 days to advise her client. Give her 2 days, I said. Already did, Frank said. One more thing. The IRS inquiry. I had our tax attorney submit the corrected filings with a cover letter documenting the forged signatures. That's in motion now, separately from the divorce proceedings. Good, I said. I finished the site walkthrough, drove home, and found Ella in the living room with 2 suitcases standing near the door. She was sitting on the arm of the couch, her coat on, phone in her hand. She looked like someone who had finally made a decision after months of pretending she hadn't already made it. I'm going to stay with Maggie for a while, she said. I nodded. All right. She stood up. She looked around the room. The furniture we'd picked out together, the framed photos on the wall, the life we'd assembled over 17 years. And something moved through her expression that I couldn't fully read. Regret, maybe, or just inventory. I want Asher to be able to see me, she said. Asher makes his own choices, I said. I'm not going to put that on him. He can see you whenever he wants, but you'll need to have that conversation with him yourself. She picked up her bag. At the door she paused and looked back at me. I really did love you, she said. I lost track of it somewhere. I looked at her steadily. You didn't lose track of it, Ella. You decided something else was worth more. Those are different things. I hope it was worth what it cost. She walked out. I heard her car start and pull out of the driveway. Then the street was quiet. I stood in the living room for a moment, then went upstairs to Asher's room. He was sitting on his bed with his chessboard set up in front of him, running through a game replay from his last tournament. He looked up when I came in. She left, he said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, I said. He looked at the board for a moment. She called me this afternoon, asked if I wanted to talk. What did you say? I said not yet, he said. I said I needed some time. I sat down across from him, on the edge of the desk chair. That was a fair answer. Dad, he said, looking up. You didn't have to protect me from all of it. I'm not little. I know you're not, I said. But some of it wasn't yours to carry. That's not the same as keeping you in the dark. It's just knowing which weight belongs to who. He thought about that. Then he nodded slowly, with the particular gravity of a 14-year-old who was going to be an extraordinary adult. Okay, he said. I can work with that. I left him to his chessboard and went downstairs. The house was quieter than it had been in months, but it wasn't the heavy, loaded quiet of before. This was different. This was the quiet of something that had finally been resolved. Frank called again at 7. Diane Pruitt contacted me. Her client wants to discuss a settlement. No contest on the asset division. The house, the business, the accounts. She's asking for monthly support payments and shared custody of Asher. The support number? I asked. Frank gave it to me. It was reasonable. More than reasonable, actually. Lower than what I'd expected, given the posturing. Diane told her client about the IRS filing. Frank said, I think that clarified her priorities considerably. Tell Diane we can work with a number, I said. On the custody, whatever Asher decides he wants, that's what we'll document. He's 14. He knows his own mind. Frank said he'd have the response ready by Thursday. I thanked him, hung up, and poured myself a bourbon, the good bottle I kept in a cabinet above the refrigerator that I almost never opened. I took it to the back porch and sat in the February cold for a while, looking out the yard I'd landscaped myself 3 summers ago. Tanner, I'd since learned through Frank's research, had quietly separated from Amber and moved into a rental on the south side of Charlotte. His fitness studio had lost 2 major corporate wellness contracts. Word traveled in those circles, apparently. I hadn't engineered any of that. It had simply been the natural gravity of choices pulling everything toward its proper weight. I thought about what Asher had said. You didn't have to protect me from all of it. He was right, but I'd do it the same way again. 14 months after Ella walked out the front door with 2 suitcases, I was standing in the parking lot of the Charlotte Convention Center watching a crew finish installing a new safety signage system I designed for a statewide industrial conference. Malone Workplace Solutions had just signed a partnership with a national manufacturing consortium, the largest contract in the company's history. Frank had sent a 1-line text that morning. Numbers came through. Nicely done. I drove home through afternoon traffic with the windows down, even though it was March and still a little cool, because sometimes you need the air moving around you to remind yourself that things are actually moving. Asher was in the kitchen when I got home, doing homework at the table with his headphones around his neck. He'd started seeing Ella for dinner on Sunday evenings. Just the 2 of them, his decision, his terms. He told me about it in the same direct, matter-of-fact way he told me about chess results or a grade on a test. He was navigating it in his own way, and I was staying out of navigating. Good day, he asked. Really good day, I said. He nodded and went back to his homework. I went to the bedroom closet and took down the small lockbox on the top shelf. Inside was a ring, the wedding band I'd stopped wearing in February, set beside Ella's engagement ring, which she'd left on the kitchen counter the morning she moved her remaining things out. I'd considered selling them. I considered putting them away somewhere and forgetting about them. Instead, I picked up Ella's ring and set it in a separate velvet pouch. Then I took both pouches downstairs and sat across from Asher at the kitchen table. He looked up. These are yours now, I said, setting the velvet pouch in front of him. Not to keep forever if you don't want to, but to decide. When the time comes that it matters to you, if it ever does, you'll know what to do with them. He looked at the pouch for a moment. Then he picked it up carefully and turned it in his hand. Why, he asked. Because the best things I built in this house, I said, are still in it. He held my eye for a moment, then set the pouch on the table beside his textbook. Okay, Dad, he said quietly. I got up, started dinner, and let the kitchen fill with the ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening, the kind that used to feel like not enough and now felt like exactly what they were. Ella was building something of her own on the other side of the city. I didn't follow that story closely. I wished her no harm and held no grudges, because grudges are weight you carry, and I've been very deliberate lately about what I chose to carry. Frank and I had lunch the following week. He told me the IRS case had progressed to a formal review. That was out of my hands now and had been for months. The last thing I'll say is this. I used to think that a marriage falling apart meant something had failed. Now I think some things come apart because they were never properly built to begin with. Not because one person wasn't trying, but because the other person was quietly building something else the whole time. I know what I built. It's still standing.